to beat Trump. You're going to have a conversation with people who I represent. And if you ain't having that conversation to understand where we're coming from, 9 times out of 10, you're going to lose.
I'm here with Uncle Luke, the man himself, Luke Skywalker. So happy to be talking to you today. We have a lot to talk about. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, as you know, and we're talking a lot about the candidates and politics and what people should look for, but something interesting about you that the newer generation may not know, you've been involved in politics for a long time. Kind of talk us through that and what was going on around that time.
My dad, Jamaican, my uncle, Bahamian, they taught me about politics. We couldn't look at cartoons in the house on the weekends. We would have to sit there and discuss the political issues that concerns us every day, because they knew at some point I'd be a man and be a responsible individual, as well as my other brothers, and that we had to be politically involved to understand what was going on with the world and our community.
When you became an artist, a world-renowned artist, you were still right in the middle, smack dab of politics because of what you were going through. I remember your album, Banned in the USA, that a lot of folks of our generation may remember. So what was your foray into politics during that time like?
When it became an issue of First Amendment and free speech, when it came to my music, which was heavily politically pushed, because if you were a sheriff or commissioner, you was running for office, you used me as a scapegoat during those times. If you were a politician, if you were, a federal politician, they would use me. Dan Quayle, mentioned my album to basically try and, use it as a political tool to push their agenda as well as to get elected.
So I would credit you. I mean, you were one of the people who would push back and fight against this infrastructure. And one thing that I think is interesting about you, there were pioneers of hip hop. I would count you among them. And we've seen that people in the hip hop community have grown up now. I mean, you have kids, some people in hip hop, their kids have kids. So how do you think the genre has changed? Because at one point, hip hop was all about politics, and it was all about what you were seeing happening in your community. And now, it's kind of taking a shift. There are some different topics that arise in hip hop. What do you think about the current state of hip hop, how it's changed, and its intersection with politics today?
It's still there. It's not as heavy as it was when it was me, Ice-T, Ice Cube, when we were at the top of our game, because we had to deal with politics on a daily basis. We go to do a show. I would do a show in Cincinnati, and the mayor and the police chief would show up, and I would have a First Amendment lawyer on speed dial, to then explain to me some of the things that I need to say, because it was so politically motivated when it was during those times. So we were at the forefront of white kids listening to hip hop music, and whether it was Al Gore's wife, which brought us into the political game at that time, she made it an issue, putting us on a blacklist. At the same time, my husband being a senator, and we had to be involved. We had to understand the politics, because when we negotiated at the table with a major record company, that was a issue. Where you stand as far as the music, because you had Bill Clinton getting so much money, from the major record companies, for his political campaigns, and him deregulating radio. Politics is heavily involved in music, at that time. So we had to be well abreast of what was going on. To say what changed now, you'll have Kanye West somewhat engaged in it. A lot of things I don't agree with what he does, his approach to it, but as long as he's engaged, he's his own man, and he can make his own decisions.
Well, I definitely want to get to Tipper Gore, but since you brought up Kanye, I am curious because, you know, a lot of it was black people who elevated Kanye. You know, people, he came on the scene, people respected him, they liked his music was relevant, it spoke to the community. Now that has taken a shift. And so the people who brought him here and elevated, now to see him align himself with Donald Trump, whose interests quite frequently runs contrary to the interests of people of color, particularly black people.
Well, I think, you know, you're going to have some buffoonery, and you're going to have some individuals that sell their soul to the devil, that happens every day. You just got to understand it. You got to look and see, you know, who would do that, you know, and if that's what he wants to do, and that's his prerogative. But us as black people, what we need to do is we need to understand we're two separate sets of people. The majority of African Americans live below the poverty level. That's the majority. You know, the minority is most African Americans who don't live above the poverty level. We're going to vote Democratic regardless. But the majority of African Americans, which are the young people and people who live below poverty level, that they're not stimulated. Obama was able to stimulate that group, no different than Trump, you know, stimulating what they call is uneducated whites, you know, which, as we know in this country, you know, white folks, there's more white people live below poverty level than African Americans. So he was able to stimulate that vote and get that vote energized the same way Obama energized the majority black vote, which is really not interested in politics, similar to those whites who live below poverty level, wasn't really interested into it until he came along.
Right. So I'm glad you brought that up, because there is no more Obama. You know, he's not on the ticket this time.
Right.
And he was able to awaken a generation. And, you know, a lot of people feel in 2016 we lost a generation of voters who were not inspired to come out. Now we're seeing the repercussions of that. Now
Yes.
we're seeing policy that directly, negatively impacts the black community specifically, but really all communities of color. What today should young black voters look for? Like, what can people who aren't inspired, nobody gives them goosebumps, you know, but still their lives are impacted, their everyday lives are impacted by politics. What can you say to those young people who just aren't engaged? They don't know what's happening in politics.
I tell young people all the time, get involved in local politics. You know, local politics is more important than national politics, you know, presidential campaigns. Me, for instance, you know, we have a 28 acres park in my local community. And I'll just tell you about one project. Because we went out, you know, in my youth program, which we have, you know, over 10,000 people that has been in the program over the last 29 years, we're able to vote in a young man named Keon Hardeman. We were able to go out and actually go and, you know, go door to door with him, vote him in. He's then able to come back and do things that needs to be done in the community. When you get involved in local politics versus getting discouraged about national politics, you can do a lot for your community because we all pay taxes, you know, and it's just no different than the school board. If I need things done at a school locally, you know, I can't sit there and wait for Trump to do something. If my candidate don't win, no, you have a local school board, you know, with elected officials, with superintendents. You get involved in that, you go to the meetings, and you have conversations with those individuals, and you get things done.
That's a really good point, because I think there's a lot of people, particularly in our community, who really don't understand the difference between state, federal, and local government and who does what. Even in my own family, I have people who say, we voted for Obama and we had potholes in our lawn. Now we don't even have those potholes anymore. And it's like you have to tell people Obama knows nothing about your potholes.
Right.
They have to know who handles that. So given that you have a good understanding of that, let's address some of the rumor mill. Will there be a Luke for Mayor campaign anytime soon?
You didn't tell me you were going to talk about that.
That's what I'm hearing, that you might run for mayor. What do you think?
Well, I mean, the jury's still out on it. I did run before, and the reason I ran the one time was to get more young people involved in the political process, because what I did is I looked at it from a standpoint that there was a lot of young people that got involved when President Obama ran the first time. So there's a lot of young people that have voters registration cards, and there's a lot of people who never voted before. People want people that they can relate to. When I did it, I created a base. You know, we pretty much got about 18 to 20% of the vote here in Miami-Dade County. And I was able to take that vote and now I use it. So you 9 times out of 10, you won't get elected to office if I don't endorse you. All active in my newspaper where I write at the Miami New Times. That's like my daily, weekly newsletter to my constituents, you know, and it's just, you know, you have to stay involved. You have to stay involved. So as far as running, I don't know, you know, I'm thinking about it.
Okay, we're going to stay tuned so you keep us posted.
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit. You talked about your column in the Miami New Times. So you wrote a column, a scathing column, I would say, about Senator Kamala Harris.
Scathing?
Yep, for
Oh,
sure.
I like
We're going
that
to talk
word.
about it. Your column essentially was saying that people should not vote for her because of her prosecutorial record for the time that she spent as a DA in California. So I'm curious. I think that, you know, maybe a fair criticism that some people have brought of her. I'm curious because you also got into her personal life. And, you know, a lot of women, particularly black women, found your column to be somewhat sexist in bringing up her personal background. And at the time you wrote the column, she wasn't the only candidate in the field, but she's who you chose to write a column about. What do you say to those women who feel like this black man is introducing sexism into this campaign and not supporting the black woman in it? Because when we talk about sexism, we frequently don't think of our community, but there's a lot that exists in our community. How do you address that criticism?
Well, how do I address it? I say get over it, because the bottom line is if we all could sit, you know, in a room and have a conversation about individuals, our individual track records, or how people reach the level that they reached. I mean, let's not be fake about it. When I write a column, it's what the average person is talking about. You know, when I sit in the barbershop with the rest of my friends and we have conversations, you know, where you have a lot of great conversations about the barbershop. And when I was a kid, you know, my mom was a beautician, and I would have to sit in the beauty parlor and listen to women talk about certain issues, whether it was politics or whether it was a person who reached a certain plateau because they did certain things. That's just the nature of the beast. So, I mean, I don't think I say anything that's wrong. I just lay a case out. You know, and the case that I laid out in my column was, yes, you slept with a married man. That's a fact. And when you slept with after you slept with a married man who was a very powerful married man, you ended up doing what? He ended up helping you becoming a major politician, you know, the state prosecutor. So after you became state prosecutor, then you end up doing what? You married the white guy, which is not a bad thing, but in our community, this is what we talk about.
But you presented it like it was a bad thing.
Yeah, no, well, it can be taken that way.
I think most people took it that way.
Well, you could take it that way. But people talk about this. I have conversations with my wife, who's a Kamala fan, with my mother-in-law, and all of them are AKAs, and my sister-in-law, another AKA. And if you sit there and have a conversation, you have difference of opinion. The older AKA has one strong opinion, you know, which I wouldn't want to discuss her opinion on camera, but a lot of older women, put it this way, you know, feel a certain kind of way as to how you got to be where you're at, you know, at this point, which is her prerogative. You know, like I say, you could take it in a negative way, but at the end of the day, do you talk about that?
Just to touch on what you said, because you seem to suggest that by her sleeping with a married man, that's how she got where she is. Not her Howard Law degree, not the hard work she did. So just to give you a chance to clear that up, is that what you're suggesting, that she only got here by sleeping with this married man?
Well, I guess you look at how we always look at how a person got to where they at. We look at how did this young man play football. He ended up he played at Pop Warner, then he went to high school, then went from high school, then went to college at Alabama, then went from Alabama, he got drafted. So you look at a person's track record, how did they get to where they're at, and what are some of the things that they achieve? I think she's a brilliant politician. There's no question about it. She has to answer that question, whether she slept with this married, powerful man, politically powerful man. Was that her agenda? When I go to my barbershop, that is what they're talking about. How did she get to the point where she is? That's what they're talking about. Cory Booker and his track record on incarcerating African-American men. They're talking about Joe Biden's incarceration of African-American men that we see every day in his crime bill. So all of them in the Democratic Party, which I am Democrat, all of them have those same issues. And they talk about, this lady, this African-American. We as black men, to keep it 100, we still do somewhat struggle with a black woman being with a white man, but it's okay. It's not a problem. But when we see our top of the line, prominent African-American, highly educated women, which I know a lot of African-American women struggle with African-American men.
Do you
in
struggle
sports.
with African-American women who far outnumber marrying outside their race? Proportionately, black men marry outside the black race way more than black women. Do you struggle with that?
We all had that conversation within our community. Do people want to talk about it? No, I'll talk about it.
So have you written a column about black men marrying
Yes,
white women?
I have. It's not a bad thing. I don't knock it. You love who you want to love, whether you black, white, green, straight, gay. You love who you want to love, but the fact of the matter, we do have these conversations in the community. And if I'm the messenger and I put it out for dialogue and for people to think about it and have a conversation about it in a piece, then that's what I do. But again, I don't have a problem with individuals marrying outside the race. Let me just say one of why we love Barack so much. We love his wife. We know she was one of us. No question about it. When she walked in the room and she had to say but a few words, we know Michelle she could relate to it. That's what made him win. You know what I'm saying? You have to have a partner. That was the ultimate African-American family. Even with him having a white mother, at the same time. But we know that is that's will always be my president, her. And even to this day right now.
So if Kamala Harris is a nominee, is there any way that you could see yourself supporting her?
No doubt about it. I would support her. Whoever is the nominee, I voted for Hillary, and it was hard for me to vote for Hillary.
Why?
Oh, sorry. She's a reflection of nothing that I'm about. Status quo, same thing. Were we going to be better as a people under her? No. I think her husband ruined the music business, and created what you have right now today. When he deregulated radio stations and allowed the conglomerates to come in and buy these little African-American businesses, and now we only can listen to 13 songs in a row. I think it was some real detriment that the Clintons did. But again, that was a nominee, so, I'm not gonna vote for Trump because, hey, look, I wasn't gonna do that. That was a whole nother movie there. So at the end of the day, whoever is the nominee, I'll support them. If she's the nominee, I'm supporting her.
Vocally, actively?
I'll knock on door to door. Here, I think we'll do anything for this guy not to end up becoming being reelected.
So I want to circle back to activism and hip hop quickly. So you are an activist. You do a lot here in Florida. I saw the mayor gives you the keys to the city. You're well known in this swing state. Recently in the headlines, A$AP Rocky. He was detained in Sweden. Now, a few years ago, people asked A$AP Rocky about his politics and his activism, and he said, you guys want me to be Al Sharpton? That's not who I am. I'm not involved in that. However, it was activism that got him home. It was people lobbying this president and being very vocal about it to make sure that he was not left in solitary confinement forever. Because you have grown up in hip-hop, you're one of the pioneers, what advice do you give to these younger artists who seem so disconnected from activism, who don't really want to lend their voice to the struggles that the people who buy their records, the people who enrich them, the people who elevate them to this status, What do you say to those artists who seem to abandon what's happening in the community? It's not like it was when you were, at the top. What do you say to those artists?
Anytime I, have a conversation with any of those young guys, I tell them, look, we always say, what city we rep. I rep Miami. You rep New York, you rep California. You are a representative of that area. And so it's your responsibility to be no different than the state rep or the federal rep or the congressman. Those people rep that particular jurisdiction in which elected them. And so I tell them all the time, it is your responsibility to go back and get involved in the political process. Educate these young people. You'll be very surprised that these politicians will listen to you because they know that you have a voice and you have a constituent and a base of people that they want, which is the silent majority, that base of hip hop. And that's why I always call it, I say I represent the hip hop party. I'm not really a Democrat. You have that base and you have that platform and you can make some real serious changes in your community where you don't even have to come out your pocket. If you take 5 minutes, and go to a high school, go to high schools in your area, kids are 18 years old, encourage them to get a voter's registration card. After they go get a voter's registration card, then go in, vet the candidates yourself. Have a conversation with them. Tell them what the people want in your community. That's how you change it. I mean, nothing happens in Miami-Dade County without me knowing about it. I mean, if a guy who's going to be the police chief, I have to have a conversation with him because the mayor is going to send him to have a conversation with me, and I'm going to then say these are some of the things that we don't want happening on the streets of Miami, whether stop and frisk, whether it's a weed and seed neighborhood, whether the police are putting the wrong police in the neighborhood, to agitate the situation. If you see certain things that are happening, you see these schools are bad. You see that, you got gentrification in the neighborhood where you're losing your property and now you're being moved out. When you see these things, you have a platform. I tell these guys, look, you can stop that. You can slow it down as well as stop it by just getting involved. That's your community contribution. And if you're a real artist that really rep your city, then you would get involved. And I tell them that all the time.
We're going to have 3.5 million young people eligible to vote in 2020. This is the first year that Hispanic voters will eclipse Black voters. They will be the most eligible voters in the country. A lot of people don't pay attention to the minutia of politics. I take your point that state and local politics matter more than federal politics, but because we're in a presidential election year, what is something that you think young people who have not previously been involved, who grew up knowing the possibility of a Black president, they grew up seeing Obama, what is something that they should focus on? Because even Obama himself said, don't look for another me. Don't look for someone to give you goosebumps. Look for someone who has a policy that speaks to you. So for all the people who feel like whoever's president, it doesn't impact my life, it doesn't change my life. This is not true. We're seeing how it impacts their life now.
Right.
What's something that you can say to them to convince them your life is impacted by politics? Here are the things that you should be looking for in this presidential election in a candidate. What would you say?
This race is more important to young people than it is to me because what happens in the next 4 years is actually going to affect them in the next 10 years. So I say to young people all the time, if you don't like Muslim ban, if you don't like the rhetoric coming out of the president's mouth, whether he's a racist and he supports white supremacy, if you don't like, the crime bill, if you think that this person has atoned for what he's done before and you can get better things out of them because they were a part of the crime bill or because they, locked up a lot of people in California, you're not going to find a candidate that you agree with everything that they do. It's just majority of the things. And then you go out there and you support them and you go vote for them and you just go and try and get that person elected.
Let's talk quickly about guns, because Killer Mike has been somebody who's very outspoken about...
Yeah, that's my dog.
Yes, black gun ownership. He was a Bernie supporter. And we've seen recently a spike in gun violence. Some would argue that it was highlighted by this president's racist rhetoric. A lot of the people in the Latino community feel targeted. Florida obviously has a huge Latino community. Where do you stand on gun rights? What do you think needs to be done?
You know, there's no room for an assault rifle. I mean, that is the weapon of choice in the hood. You know, you probably have more people dying on a monthly basis than, you know, the 17 kids that died in Parkland. I mean, these are things that gun is used every day, whether Chicago, Detroit, Miami, Atlanta. That gun is used every day. So I think being a protector of the Constitution, you know, everybody does have the right, you know, to bear arms because that is the law in this country. But that particular gun is an assault rifle. I don't think it has no place in society. You know, let's treat it like the drug industry. Certain drugs you're gonna need a prescription for, and certain drugs you can buy over the counter. Now, this particular gun, we need to do extensive background check and a whole lot of other things because this is a prescription gun.
I'm curious, have any of the candidates actually reached out to you?
I mean, the last presidential candidate that reached out to me was Barack Obama through Kendrick Meeks, who was our
Former member of Congress.
congressman
Yeah.
when he was running. And, you know, I had a great conversation with him.
Tell us about that conversation.
Oh, it was a great conversation. We talked, you know, it was like basically, hey, look, I'm running for president. You know, I'm gonna need all the support from everybody, you know, in the hip hop community. And if you can make some phone calls to some of the guys that I might not be able to reach, you know, as well as support in the state of Florida. And I was like, look, you're a friend of Kendrick's, and if he co-signs you, then, you know, I'm good. You know, it was a nice, brief conversation, but I respected the fact that he did reach out, and just to hear a person's voice for 2 minutes, you can kind of get a good feel as to where they're at, you know, just a few key words.
So what are those few key words that the candidates would have to say to you today for you to say, you know what, in this primary, I'm backing this person?
Me is, you know, even though I was hard in my op-ed on Kamala, I mean, I would love to have a conversation with her. I would love to have a conversation with any one of them. A lot of these candidates are misinformed, and a lot of them, I don't see not one individual in the Democratic Party that really gets it, what the silent majority of African Americans want. You know, to beat Trump, you're gonna have to have a conversation with people who I represent, and if you ain't having that conversation, to understand where we're coming from, then 9 times out of 10 you're gonna lose. If an individual is trying to empower African Americans with better education, the first person to tell me, you know, they talk about, you know, free education for everybody. The first person that says they're gonna pump money into historical black colleges, you got my vote. If you say that, I'm good. If we're gonna legalize medical marijuana and you're gonna put bills together, make it not difficult for us to own license, you got my vote. If you know, those guys we went to jail for selling weed. I got weed on my record for selling weed. You know, so those are some of the things that prevent a lot of these men from getting good jobs. But then now you're gonna legalize it and everybody profits off it and we don't profit off it. It's a sad thing.
Luke, I could talk to you all day.
We gotta stop.
No, you gotta get to your football team. Your football team. All right, guys, that's all the time we have with Uncle Luke. This has been amazing. Thank you so much again, Luke. This has been a fascinating conversation, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.